this video, I will show you how I like to create pulses in Current. And if you don't own Current, then I also have a few tutorials on how to do this in Vital. And it should be possible to replicate this in the majority of synthesizers anyway, because the basic technique and process is rather simple for this. So let's start with a sine wave. And now to create the actual pulse, I'm going to use a curve here. You could also use an envelope or an LFO. Now there are multiple ways to do this. You could use this on the level of the oscillator, or you could use one of these filters here. What I like to do is to go to the effects section and use one of the filters there, because then I have the most control over where in the effects chain I want to actually place the filter. So I'm just going to put this on the cutoff of this filter here, and then just change the shape. And let's also increase the rate a bit. And this is pretty much already the basic setup. But now if I want to add effects here, so let's say I'm going to add a few compressors and a bit of distortion maybe. Now if I wanted to clean this up, I could just change the position of the filter here. But I actually like it this way, and I usually place a filter at the end of the chain just to control the overall frequency content of this. So this filter up here is for the movement, for the actual pulsing movement, and this one down here is to control the overall sound. So that's why I put it at the end, because no matter what kind of effects I place in between these two filters, if they introduce harmonics, if they introduce frequencies that I don't like, I can still control it at the end. And now once this is set up, we can go back to our oscillators, getting more interesting or different textures out of this. So I can actually engage this up here and just remove the harmonics so I have a clean sine wave, and then I can change this to some other waveform. So you could use an LFO on this to just create this kind of movement here. I very often like to use the same curve or envelope that I'm using for the overall movement, just to give this bit of a more interesting character. And we can also use a second oscillator with a different waveform. And we could also pitch this one up and make it a bit wider. And it's always good to play around with the pitches of these, just to see in which range they work best. And you can also play around with the overall pitch of the pulse. And then we can also add more effects to color the sound a bit more. Let's just use a distortion here. And always play around with changing the position of the effects in your overall effects chain, especially if you have effects in place that kind of control the sound a lot, like all these compressors here. So if I place it in front of this filter, then the majority of this effect gets lost. If I place it after all the compressors here, then I think it's a bit too much, and I really like it at this position in this case. And obviously you also don't have to use a shape like this. You could play around with this and make it a bit more interesting and dynamic, for example with something like this, and then just reduce the tempo. So I hope this was helpful and gives you a better idea of how you can create very basic pulses and then just have fun experimenting.